Hi friend, welcome to my kitchen. Today we are going to be making something that is fitting for the day. One is kind of gloomy out, so that always puts me in a baking mood. We're fast approaching fall in my opinion, and that means we probably have a ton of zucchinis in the garden that we need to use up. So I thought we would make some zucchini bread. However, we're going to put a twist on it and we're going to add some sourdough discard to the batter. So there's a few reasons why you might want to add sourdough discard to your batters like banana bread or zucchini bread. And one is that sourdough discard contains water, so that's going to add some nice moisture to your loaf. It's also going to add a subtle tang, which we always love. Not aggressive, just subtle. It's going to add a real nice depth of flavor to your loaf. Since there's some gluten developed in the starter already, that will add probably a nice chew to your loaf. So it'll change the structure a little bit in a good way. And then it also acts as kind of like an egg. So it'll bind the loaf together and give it more structure. And then obviously there's the nutritional benefits if you do choose to long ferment your dough. It'll be able to break down some of that gluten and make it easier for us to digest. However, I am not going to be long fermenting it today. I'm just going to use a discard and bake it right away. My neighbor gave me a humongo zucchini, so I need to use that up. I'm going to use half of it today to make 2 zucchini loaves. And we're gonna add basically what I have in the kitchen. I have some leftover pecans I'm gonna put in. I have some chocolate chips. I have some hemp hearts, and then some warm spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. And it's gonna be delish. So let's start baking. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is go ahead and preheat your oven to 350 degrees so that your oven is prepared when your bread is ready to go in. If you have a large zucchini like mine, one thing I would recommend is scraping out the seeds because you don't want those big seeds in your bread or your muffins. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going ahead and scraping those completely out before I slice them and get ready to shred them. If you have a food processor, I would recommend using it because it's going to save you a lot of time, and make sure that you're grating it on the large setting. There's usually a fine setting as well, but I like the texture of the large. This massive half of a zucchini made a lot of shredded zucchini, so I'm just going to set this in a bowl and let it sit until I add it to the batter, but this recipe calls for 1.5 cups of zucchini. Now we need a clean bowl to make the batter. So this recipe calls for vegetable oil. I'm not really a fan of vegetable oil. I prefer avocado oil or olive oil. Here I'm using coconut oil, and you do not taste the flavor of coconut at all. Another great option would be to maybe brown some butter. I think that'd be delicious in zucchini bread or zucchini muffins. So you're gonna need 1/2 cup of vegetable oil. I doubled it, so I put 1 cup. Then go ahead and put 2 large eggs in with your oil. And next you're going to need some sugar. It asks for 1 cup of sugar, 1/4 cup of granulated white sugar, and 3/4 cup of brown sugar. I put all brown sugar in, and I actually didn't have brown sugar pre-made. I just added about 1 tablespoon to 1.5 tablespoons of molasses to the cane sugar, and that's a great way to make your own brown sugar. Then you're going to whisk that up until it's slightly lighter in color, kind of like what you do when you're making cookies. Next, we're going to go ahead and add some vanilla extract. I always think more vanilla extract is better. The recipe calls for 1 teaspoon. I put in about 1 tablespoon to 1.5 tablespoons. You're going to need 1/2 teaspoon of salt and about 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. Now we're going to go ahead and add the sourdough discard. It can be active or non-active, but when I add sourdough discard to my batters, I usually take out about 1/3 cup or 1/2 cup of flour and replace it with 1/3 cup or 1/2 cup of the starter. In this situation, I took out 1/2 cup of the flour and replaced it with 1/2 cup of the starter.
Since this recipe is not by weight and is in cups, it's really important that you fluff up your flour before you add it to your bowl. So this recipe calls for 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. Make sure that you switch utensils. If you were using a whisk, try and fold in the flour instead of whisking it in, because you don't want to develop too much gluten. You want this bread to be nice and fluffy. Here you can see that I actually don't wring out the zucchini. A lot of recipes do say to wring out the zucchini to get out the water. I think that the water is fine. It adds a lot of moisture to the bread. I did let it sit, as you can see, and it did lose some water, but not everything. I added some toasted pecans, some hemp hearts, and chocolate chips as my add-ins for this bread, but you could add like shredded coconut, walnuts, or even dried cranberries. That would be delicious. I'm making 2 loaves this time, but a lot of the time I like to make a loaf and then also muffins because it's just super easy to carry those with kids. So I would recommend making muffins too, because those are delicious, they're easy to freeze, and if you have kids, you know what I mean. I coated the tins with some butter and some flour, and then also put parchment paper in there just to make sure that this bread does not stick. And then I eyeballed putting the batter in evenly. So if you wanted to long ferment this zucchini bread, this is what you would do. You'd mix together the flour, sourdough discard, eggs, and oil, but leave out the baking soda and baking powder and any add-ins like chocolate chips. Then cover the bowl and let it sit at room temp for 8 to 12 hours or refrigerate it overnight. Then the next day, stir in the rest of the ingredients, including the leavening agents like the baking soda or baking powder and zucchini and your mix-ins. Then you'd pour it into your pans, bake it as usual. It's just an extra step. However, there are a lot of benefits to it, and it does add a lot of flavor to your loaf. So if you have time or you want to try it out, I would definitely recommend doing it with this loaf.
Okay, so the bread was in the oven for about 1 hour and 5 minutes. And I already cut it, but I'm going to cut it again so you can see. Let's cut it right down the middle. I'm that person that just wants that middle piece. One thing I will say is a lot of the chocolate chips drop to the bottom, which, I mean, it's not ideal, but it still tastes pretty darn good. Chocolate chips anywhere in bread taste good. But this bread is so moist. Wow. Fully cooked through, but so moist. You can really taste those warm spices, and it has a little bit of like a crunchy top from the sugar crystallizing on top, which is always delicious. But yes, this recipe is definitely worth trying. For sure. This is going to freeze well too if we freeze it. I know my family is going to devour it. But if you have some extra zucchini and you're looking for a way to use it, and you also have some sourdough discard, I would recommend giving this recipe a try. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in my kitchen in my next one. Have a wonderful day.